Okay, well, again, thanks for coming. Images from above, all about drones and how to make photos using one. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into this. So this is a shot from a drone, and you can see that this is Valley of the Gods in Utah. And this would be I'll talk more about some of the advantages of, why you might want to consider using drones, particularly obviously for outdoor photos. But you could never take a picture like this because basically you can see in every direction it's flat, and you would always be sort of shooting up. And for example, among other things, you wouldn't see all those nice shadows and the eroded sort of badlands part of this feature. So we will come back to Valley of the Gods in a little bit, but thought I would start us off with a picture of a drone shot. Things to cover tonight. Why drones for photos? What drone should I use? And I'm going to talk in some detail about alternative drones. And the FAA and its various regulations about drones. Where can I fly my drone? And maybe more importantly, where can I not fly my drone? I'm going to show some flying and photo tips. And we'll talk about places somewhere near us where you can legally use your drone and take pictures. And then we'll go over some images made from drones. I meant to ask this, you're all muted, but I guess if anybody is a drone user right now, maybe unmute yourself and say so. And if not, I'll assume, I don't remember seeing drone pictures from anybody in this group. So
Lanny has a Mavic too.
Oh, do you? Cool. Yeah, I'm on the, well, I'll talk. I'm on the Air 2S.
I bought the DJI Mini 2 weeks ago
Oh, yeah, very good.
to get started. So
yeah, well, great. Then hopefully my talk will be helpful. And
yes, I hope so.
yeah, and I would add if there was, to my knowledge, at least the only one who's sort of open about it. Sherry Bell Carper, who's a member and doesn't participate real actively, but she has a Air 2S, and they're the only people, plus the two people on this call, who actually have these things. So, but I thought it might be fun sometime to have drone events. We could invite people who don't have them but are thinking about it. So anyway, let me continue on here. So these are our topics for tonight. So why drones for photos? As I showed in that first picture, many subjects are hard to compose effectively from the ground. So drones can give us new perspectives and enable us to get images that we could shoot, but not very effectively. So that's one reason we like drones for photos. You get different and flexible perspectives. When you are on foot, it can be very slow to move, if even possible, to move to a different perspective on a subject. For example, say there's a really nice cloud and you want to put it in a certain spot right behind the main subject. With a drone, you can quickly do that, and it might not be possible if you had to go overland. Something new and exciting. And first and foremost, you can keep spending more money on photography equipment. So these are reasons that we like drones for photography. Couple of caveats on things we will not cover today. I'm not going to talk about flying a drone for commercial purposes. So the FAA has different licensing and regulations for commercial drones, and I'm not going to cover those. And I don't do videos, so I'm not going to talk about video from drones. And if anybody is a current drone user and wants to chime in after I'm done, they can maybe talk to us a little bit about their experiences with video. So this is a drone. This is my Mavic Air 2S that my wife held for me while I took a picture. And everybody can see my cursor right down in the blue. Yes? Okay. It has, you're probably generally familiar with these. These are all foldable. So these will sort of tuck into the main body, and it can get down to a pretty compact package. The propellers are hinged, so they all collapse into a straight line along these supports. And you can see the camera right here. And that is on in effect, a gimbal head, a stabilized gimbal head. And it's pretty good. It'll just kind of sit there and float and not really have a lot of movement in it, even though your drone might be, when you're hovering, your drone might be still moving a little bit. But I don't, obviously you try and use fast shutter speeds, but I don't see many issues where there is motion blur because things are moving around. So, and if we were holding one of these in real life, the thing just sort of floats there. And so it's very effectively stabilized. And I don't think there's anything else to point out. You'll see some of the sensors, like right here, are vision sensors, and there's one down here. And the drones have, especially moderately priced like this one, and then more expensive ones, do have sensors that will enable you to somewhat avoid collisions with ground objects. And then this is the same drone looking down. The battery compartment opens on the top, and I've pulled the battery here. So that's what that looks like, and you can see it from the top. And again, all the arms fold up and the propellers tuck in, so it becomes very compact. And don't think you can really read this, but again, if you see my cursor right here, you are legally required to have a label on these things with your FAA serial number. And I put my name and phone number on them. So if the thing gets lost, has a crash and gets lost, if somebody found it, they could get a hold of me. So this is another view of what the drone looks like. The propellers are easily replaceable. There's sort of a spring-loaded mechanism here. So if one of these gets damaged, you can pop it off quickly and put a replacement one on. And this is what the control setup looks like. Like everything these days, your phone plays a big role in controlling the drone. There's a DJI app that you put on your phone, and then you clamp the phone into the holder. And over here, you plug the phone into the controller. And most of the software, at least a lot of the software, is actually in the phone. And in the next couple of pictures, I'll show you what your screen or instrumentation looks like. So the two control sticks, this one is, as you would expect, is forward and backwards. And this one is left and right. And then over here, if you push it forward, the drone goes up. You pull it back, the drone goes down. And if you go left or right, the drone rotates in that direction. And this button is this button right here is your best friend. That is the return to home button. You press that and hold it down, and the drone will climb to a preset altitude, then fly back automatically. You don't have to do anything. Directly over to the spot where it took off, and then it'll lower itself down to a landing, requiring nothing from the operator. Over here, although it's not visible where my finger is, that's the button you press where you want to take pictures. And I think this one, again, I don't do video really, but I think this toggles from video to stills. And there's a few other less important buttons on this, but these are your main controls and how they lay out. So this is what your screen looks like when your drone is connected and ready to fly. This was in my spare bedroom, so the drone is live on this, but we managed to restrain and not fly it inside the house. So one thing you'll notice, I take this thing in here and this is a reminder for me to make sure the thing is when I'm taking pictures, to make sure it's focused properly. And I will talk a little bit more about focus on these things later on. But this is what your instrumentation looks like. So this is and you can kind of move these around on the screen where you like to see them. This is your histogram, and functions just like a histogram in your DLSR. And it is something you need to pay attention to. You can, on this screen, just like you can on your camera, you can enable a highlight blowout warning. So I didn't have any, as you can see from the histogram, I don't have any blown out highlights. but you can do that so that you can tell if you're in danger of overexposing the image. This is your speed, and this is the height the drone is flying from its takeoff point, and this is the distance, the D right here, from its where it initially took off. So these are particularly the height, because you have legal restrictions on the height. These are things that you have to pay attention to when you're flying. And this is the strength of your signal, which is usually just fine. And this is an important one for you. That tells you your battery life. So once you start flying the thing, it'll start, these things can fly in the very low 30s, like mine can, 31 to 32 minutes. And I think you get a low battery warning around 25 minutes or even a little bit less. And if you don't take any action, the automation will override it and fly it back to where you took off automatically. And then down here is your camera stuff. And that's, you don't have any choice about your JPEG. So it will shoot JPEGs whether you want it or not. I have it set to capture RAW as well. Sorry, this is your shutter speed. That's your white balance, which generally leave on auto. You can adjust, you can do exposure compensation. I'm at negative 0.7 stops, which is where I usually leave it. And then this is your, you can see the ISO 200 here. And the things will bracket, and in this thing up here, you can see I do have automatic exposure bracketing turned on. It's set in autofocus, and I think these are the high hard ones on what you see when you're flying your drone. And then here you see whichever way you point the drone is what you'll see. But on the control box down here, the button is over here. There's a wheel, and you can adjust the elevation of the camera anywhere from, it has a 90-degree range, so it can go anywhere from straight ahead to straight down. And you know, that'll, whatever you're seeing from the camera will show up right here. So I'm going to pause. Anybody have any questions? If you do, just unmute yourself. If not, I'm going to keep going.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah, please, Dennis.
The camera that the phone that you're using is just sized right for your system. Can you use any size camera or phone rather? I have a small one like an SE, which doesn't quite fit the same way.
Yes, a good question, Dennis, and thank you for bringing that up. So see this thing right here? This is, it's on two metal posts, and it's spring loaded. So you begin by pulling this part out with your hand, and you get it out far enough. And again, you're pulling against a spring. You get it out far enough and you get your phone in there, and then let it go, and it clamps on your phone. So if your phone has a smaller dimension than this, it'll just come in further and clamp it. Some people fly these things with tablets, and I have not done that, but you can buy as an aftermarket item sort of a bracket that would enable you to clamp a tablet, which would give you a bigger screen here. I need to, I have the drone set up and the app set up on my tablet, but I haven't tried doing that with it. It would obviously have some advantages because, you know, seeing this stuff on this small of a screen, you know, you miss things because it's not immediately evident to you. And I have a phone with a curved screen, which creates reflections, and it's, the phone is, this is sort of a weakness of using these things, about having to do this off of a phone, and a bigger screen would be nicer. So I'm going to move on if I answered that question. Anybody else?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I have a couple of comments.
Yeah.
Lanny here.
Yeah, hi, Lanny.
Not all controllers look like this. Mine, for instance, has an integrated screen and a whole lot more things going on below. And you mentioned something about elevation of the camera. That's called tilt, to not be confused with the actual elevation that you're flying at.
Yes, yeah, it's only the camera that's moving.
Yes.
It's swinging from straight down to sort of straight forward.
Right.
No. Yeah, okay, yeah, I should have said that. I can only, this presentation is based on the Mavic Air 2S, so I can't comment very easily on, other models and other things that they have. But I believe that DJI in general is moving to running these things off of their phones, because I mean, it keeps their cost down, and they can sell them more cheaply if they're not supplying you with a screen.
Hey, Pete, this is Gary.
Yeah, Gary.
I discovered there's a setting in settings under gimbal where you can actually have the camera go above 0 degrees. I think it's up to plus 30 degrees.
Let me think about that. Maybe that's true. I'm not sure why you would ever use that, but unless you were really in close to something, but yeah, it might go more than 0 degrees.
I think the default is just to go straight ahead 0 degrees elevation.
Yeah,
But-
you don't, I don't think on the instrumentation, it tells you what your tilt is. You just see it on the screen, and
Right,
you
yeah.
push it all the way to one direction and it'll pretty quickly be going straight down, and then you move the wheel all the way to the other direction and it'll go as high as it ever goes. And that might be higher than 0 degrees. But you're not really looking at numbers, you're just looking at what you see.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? All right, I'm going to move on.
I have one quick question.
Yeah, please.
When you release the gimbals, does it hover?
Yes, yeah. Or,
Okay.
well, not the gimbal, Mike, if the sticks.
The sticks, yeah.
If you take your hands off the sticks, it just sits there.
Okay.
And it would sit there, I guess when the battery got low, it would just take over and fly itself back. Otherwise, it would sit exactly where it is. So it is kind of hard to get in trouble on these things, because if things seem to go crazy on you, you just take your hands off the sticks and kind of mentally regroup and figure out next steps. So I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the talk, but I flew fixed wing radio controlled for 25 years. And I can tell you, you are on those sticks every second, if not every quarter of a second. So in some ways, flying this drone was a very relaxing experience, because you do have that ability to just let go and it'll just sit there until you can figure out next steps. Okay, anyone else? Super. So what drone should I use? Again, well, DJI dominates the consumer market with probably a 90% share, if not more. So, we could talk about other models for consumer users, but there's no point because they have such a small share of the market. It's unlikely that anybody is actually going to use those. This is not true for professional markets. Their share is more like 50%. And if you were actually interested in going that route, then then you would want to look at manufacturers other than DJI. But for hobbyists and casual photographers like us, or even uncasual photographers, DJI is probably the spot you're going to get into. So I decided to focus this on 3 choices for DJI, which are all being currently manufactured. There's a rumor that actually it's the Mini Mark II. There's a rumor that a Mini Mark III is about to be delivered. And, we'll see. The Air 2S is relatively recent, and the Mavic 3, which is sort of their flagship prosumer zone drone, is relatively recent. I think they started shipping that maybe 6 months ago. So I'm going to do the deep dive on these, and you're sort of moving from the bottom to the, more up the DJI consumer product line when you look at these. So the Mini Mark II, and again, in theory, a Mini Mark III is around the corner. The camera is fixed aperture f2.8, fixed focal length of 24 millimeters. The sensor is a 12 megapixel sensor, cell phone size. It has, you can control your ISO and white balance, and see if I mentioned this. Yeah, you can also have the option on the Mark II to have shoot in RAW on the Mark II. The first DJI Mini, you couldn't shoot in RAW. You know, realistically, you got 25 minutes in the air on a battery before you have to come down and change batteries. There is not any collision avoidance on this one. So if you know, you don't see a tree up there and don't move, it won't try and go around the tree. With the combo, and you really have to have the combo on these things. With the combo, you get a case, 2 extra batteries, a bunch of extra propellers, and some other things, but you really need the case and the 2 extra batteries. And I think the drone itself with just a battery is $450, and the other stuff bought separately would cost you more than $150. So it really doesn't make any sense to buy these without their combo. And again, within my experience, having 3 batteries is pretty essential. So that's the key stuff.
Hey, Pete,
Yep. Yes.
just a comment. The reason I got mine 2 weeks ago was because it was on sale for $475.
Yeah, I think what's happening. Did you get it at Costco?
Actually through GameStop.
Yeah.
And it might be because the Mini 3 is about to come out.
Yes, that's what happens. And you'll probably, you know, for a long time, you could buy the Mark I at Costco at a pretty low price. And I think what you're going to see is that you'll see the Mark IIs start to pop up like where you bought it or at Costco with a pretty good haircut on the price.
Right.
And that's because they're about to bring out the Mark III. So I haven't seen any hot rumors about the specs on the Mini Mark III and to see how much of an upgrade it's going to be. I mean, the one, well, we'll talk about the Air 2S right now, but the one huge thing would be getting away from the cell phone size sensor, but they probably won't do that because then they would be cannibalizing the Air 2S. So anyway, fixed aperture on this one, just like the Mini. The fixed focal length at 22 millimeters. It is a 1-inch sensor, which is same thing as the Sony RX100 series as an example. And that is a huge improvement over the cell phone size sensors, particularly in terms of not getting your shadows all gummed up with noise and a variety of other issues. And the 20 megapixels it'll give you a bigger file size. But the 1-inch sensor is a big upgrade over the earlier models and over the Mini. Like on the Mini, the variable ISO and white balance, same endurance in the air, about 25 minutes. There is some collision avoidance on this. I have a good friend in the club who can remain anonymous who put the collision avoidance to the test, and that was a mistake because it got stuck in a tree. So it has some collision avoidance, but I'm not sure how much it would help you if you did something that you probably shouldn't have done. So, but it's better than nothing. Might save your goose if you were flying in a way that wasn't ideal. And again, it's a big jump up in price. With a combo, this is running about $1,300. And then, like I say, this is pretty recently released. This is the flagship of their consumer or prosumer drone series. And there are many improvements on this over earlier models and over the Mini and the Air 2S. So first you get variable aperture, which is pretty important. It's still a fixed focal length at 24 millimeters. The sensor is a micro 4/3 sensor, so that is a nice jump up over the 1-inch, over the 1-inch. Sorry, same resolution but a much bigger sensor, so you're going to have better quality files and less issues with noise in your images. Like the other ones, you can change the ISO and the white balance. You can set that. This is huge, as I can personally attest to, because I think you all know I like to shoot at landscapes, and as in the one image I've already shown you or the thing behind me. And you know, the longer endurance in the air means that you can take off maybe 20 minutes before the so-called golden hour or peak light and stay up in the air all the way leading up to that, and then when you get there, and then after that. And so, with the shorter endurance times, I've been in situations where I saw light that I liked and wanted to shoot in it, so I went up, and then I had to bring the drone down and change out the battery and launch it again and get it back to where it was to catch light. And, I was out of action for, 7 or 8 minutes to have to do that. So the 40 minutes for landscape shooters is huge. But of course, everything has a price. And this does have full-blown collision avoidance. Now we're $3,000 or something like that with a combo. So it is a much more capable drone. And, people who are really hardcore or, professional landscape photographers are kind of drooling over this. But it is pretty expensive. And, I would definitely, given that there is some risk of losing these things, I would definitely have the thing insured in case it, takes off and never comes back someday. But this is sort of the creme de la creme for, consumer or prosumer drones right now. So other questions? Okay, I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to talk about some of the regulations and what you can and can't do with these things. And the big thing I want to tell you is that this stuff changes rapidly. So I feel the need to sort of have some caveats up here that, at the end of the day, every time you take off, you're responsible for your own actions, for knowing what the regulations are, where you're flying, and making sure nothing has changed. And even locally, I think it's called the Rancho Cini Park District. They had an article in the Acorn where it said, well, we're going to allow drones in all these places. And then there was a bunch of whining about this. And then they said, well, now we're thinking about it. So I'm not even clear what the Rancho Cini's regulations are right now. So this stuff can change, and you need to stay current on this stuff and take responsibility for your own actions. So the next 4 slides are only a summary, so you got to treat them as such. And as I said, the regulations have changed in the past, and as an operator, you got to have current information before you fly. And I'm going to talk about where you can get that current information. So we'll cover a couple of, this goes on forever on the FAA website, but I'm going to cover the hard ones. So this is where you, URL is where you get all the information on the FAA regulations on things. I will tell you in advance, it's pretty confusing. Particularly, they seem to float back and forth between people who are commercially licensed and just casual flyers. But this is what you got, and you have to pay attention to this. So this is a site you have to go to. As a recreational user, you do not need a license. So again, this is where it gets people, you'll see chatter about commercial FAA 107 licenses. Those are for people who are using these for commercial purposes. I think all the people on this call, for example, don't need a license, but you are required to register and label your drone. And before I gave up flying the fixed wing RC, the FAA was already implementing this rule. And those of us in that hobby who'd for decades and decades had kind of just minded our own business, all of a sudden had to go on the FAA sites and get a user number and put labels on all of our RC models. So the drones are no different. This is very easy to do. If there's a charge for this, it's like a couple of dollars, and but you are required to do it. So you get your number and then make a label and put it on your drone. This is new. This started either late last year or early this year, and they've been yakking about this forever. And they came up with this in conjunction with the Academy of Model Aeronautics, which is the user/lobbying group for radio controlled model airplanes. And again, I would see all these things when I was flying RC, that they tussled with the FAA for years about, sort of legitimately feeling that the fixed wing RC or RC helicopters had gotten along just fine for decades without a bunch of regulations. And they didn't want to get their members scooped up in regulations related to drones. And they ultimately failed with that. And the FAA said, we're going to start regulating RC just like we do drones. And this trust test was sort of a compromise. It got pounded out between the Academy of Model Aeronautics and the FAA. So the trust test takes at the most 20 minutes. And if you got more than one wrong, you probably shouldn't be flying drones anyway. But you do have to take it and pass it and keep the certificate with you when you're flying your drone.
Hey, Pete.
Yes,
Pete,
Andrea.
This is
please.
Andrea. I have a Mini too, and their claim to fame apparently is that they're under 250 grams and you don't need to register them.
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I should have said that. So DJI went to what must be heroic efforts to keep, I think the Mini 2 comes in at 248 grams. So yes, it is exempt from the registration. I think when I had mine, I registered it anyway, because I really didn't care, and it's no big deal. But you are correct that the Mini 2 is light enough that you don't have to apply to that.
But do you still have to take that test?
I don't know. I didn't think about it because I knew I had to, so I just did it. I'm pretty sure you would, because that's a little different situation. They're just trying to, have a certain level of awareness and understanding of with people using these things. But I honestly don't know if you're using a Mini 2, if you need to take the test. So it would be on that website. But you definitely don't need to register again, unless that's changed. But I have to confess, since I am using a bigger drone, I haven't paid much attention to this. Okay, so other rules. FAA, we divided these into FAA rules and just common sense. The two biggies, again, when you go on the website, you'll see other stuff. But the two biggies is flying over 400 feet is illegal. And there's all kinds of chatter about what both of these, and there's this line of sight rule. There's a lot of chatter about what these mean. And this is a case where the FAA website is not particularly helpful about this stuff. So there's an obvious question about the 400 feet. Does that mean, so if you're at an elevation of 1,000 feet, you take off and you go up to 1,400 feet, and then you fly toward a mountain. So now the elevation's rising. Are you still limited to 1,400 feet, or is it 400 feet over whatever terrain you're flying over? So I believe it's the latter, and this is just based on lots of comments, but it's a little bit unclear on the website. So, if you're concerned about flying these things high, then that would be something to investigate a little bit. But there's the 400-foot rule. In addition, there is the line of sight rule. So you have to be flying your drone where there is line of sight between you and the drone. So, for example, if you take off behind a bunch of tall trees, go straight up and then fly away, you don't have line of sight. So you are clearly breaching that rule. Where this gets a little tricky is, let's say you're out in the middle of the desert and it's flat, like this volcano behind me where it's flat and wide open. Everywhere I was flying the drone that evening, I had line of sight. So these drones they're small, right? I mean, the Mini is, practically fits into your hand. So again, the question where there's endless chatter online is, does this mean you actually have to be able to see it? Because if you're flying the drone and the thing gets more than a couple hundred yards away, it's invisible. So, personally, my interpretation has been to try and look at this reasonably. And I would never fly it where I can't see where the drone is. Does this mean I've been able to actually see my drone every single time when I've flown it? And by the way, these drones have an effective range of 5 miles. So, they can fly much further than you could ever possibly see it. So this line of sight is a little bit of a gray area at some level. And again, I'm not advising you on this in any way whatsoever, but I think one thing you should be clear about this, you have to have a clear vision path from where you are to wherever the drone is. And that's obviously so it's partly in your own interest, so you don't fly it into something, and partly so you can see over in the area where it is, so you don't create some sort of hazard for other people. So these, again, there are other things that the FAA site goes on, but these are kind of the two biggies for actual flight operations. And then common sense, don't fly over people's homes or don't fly near or over people. And frankly, whenever I can, I try and take off in areas where either nobody's around or there's very few people around. So I just don't want to bother them. I shot in the, actually, I have some pictures of this in the Alabama hills last month. And so there's overnight camping in the Alabama hills. And I was out there in the morning and I tried to look very carefully and see where people were camped. So, they're not having a buzzing drone go over their heads, over their campground or their tent when they're trying to sleep. So I think you cover a lot of ground by just common sense and courtesy. So let me see. So questions so far before I move on? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Where can I not fly my drone? So all kinds of places. You can't fly them in national parks, period. No national parks. It depends on the state, but most state parks are, you can't fly them. California, like Utah, has a blanket ban on drones in state parks. The last time I checked on this, California does not, but most state parks have their own rules and don't allow them. So a good operative assumption for California is that you can't fly them in state parks either. So you could double check, but you probably can't. Actually, I can't see you nod or wave your hands, but everybody knows what a sort of legal designated wilderness area is. So the federal government reserves some areas within national forests or BLM land as wilderness areas. And you're not allowed to operate motorized items in those areas. So if it's a designated wilderness area, you can't fly a drone in it. And you can usually see these on maps. No, sorry guys. Let me mute my phone. I never get any phone calls. You can't fly them in areas with drone restrictions, and that really scoops up most of the coast in the California area. There's areas down south, like around San Pedro, for example, where you can fly, but as you move up into Big Sur in that area, most of the coast is mostly closed off to drones. And I think a main consideration about that is that people would bother marine life with the drone. So again, you got to check exactly where, but there's not very many coastal areas near where we live where you can fly these things. The FAA has certain restricted areas that are related to national security. So I was in Page, Arizona 2 months ago, and I thought there was an area where you could fly the drone that would be kind of fun. And it turns out there's a restricted area around the Glen Canyon Dam that does not allow drones. And so I couldn't fly there. So you can't fly these things in special restricted areas. You can't fly them within 5 miles of airports for obvious reasons. So these are places where you cannot fly your drone. And then, people have gotten in a lot of trouble for like forest fires around here, where people take off and use their drones to take pictures, and that's not permitted in any emergency response areas. So we'll get to the good news now. Where can I fly my drone?
Pete,
Yeah,
just a quick question. There's an app called Air Map.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Thank you
Okay.
for bringing it up, though.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 2 apps that you can do this with.
Right.
very important apps. So where can I fly my drone? You can fly them in national monuments. Again, as long as there's not a wilderness area within, if there was a wilderness area within a national monument, you couldn't fly the drone within the wilderness area, but you could fly it in any other part of the national monument. So national monuments are fair game, and a lot of them have fabulous scenery. You can fly them in national forests, again, if there's not a designated wilderness area or other restrictions. Some local open space areas, and now the Rancho Simi recreation area is kind of a jump ball, so that's a maybe. And then there's kind of this blanket thing where if they're not otherwise restricted, you can probably fly there. You know, I'm a member of the Photographic Society of America, and they have about 100 user groups, and I'm a member of group number 85, which is about drones. And yeah, a lot of people there live in the East where they don't have all these national parks, and they have much fewer areas where they have many areas where there just aren't any restrictions. So they just go up and fly them. So places not otherwise restricted, but obviously check. If any of these conflict with the previous page, at the risk of using that word, the previous page trumps. So the previous page overrides this page. There are two apps that you're going to want to get familiar. This is an FAA app, the Before You Fly app, and it's mostly federal. So that's not the final word, because state parks, for example, don't show up on that app. But that is an app you should have on your phone to see what you're doing. And then, as Gary said, there's the Air Map app, which is very useful. And even there, though, I see spots that it doesn't show as restricted that I know are restricted for some other reason. So, but these two apps are very helpful. They both show, for example, at least the Air Map does. The Air Map shows airports. So it'll tell you if you're getting in trouble because you're too close of an airport. So these are good apps for you to have on your phone to see what's going on. So any other questions? Okay, getting started. Read your annual, then read it again. It's very important to know what's going on with these things. And I would say, I've talked to one or two people who have said, I just want to take pictures and I'll let my partner, figure out how to fly the thing and all the instrumentation. This is a terrible idea. Now, if you want to use these things for pictures, you have to be a pilot as well as a photographer. So you need to get familiar with your manual and anything else that you need to use to fly these things effectively. Start off with these things by flying in a wide open place. Nobody's around. Drones are legal, and take it off and fly 30 feet in the air and get used to the thing, trying to maneuver around. So I would practice with this thing, and don't plan on taking pictures. Just get used to reading your instruments and flying the thing before you take bigger steps. While you're practicing, keep the drone close to where you can see it and watch what it does when you move the control sticks and change the inclination of the camera. For sure, test your RTH button and make sure you know how to use it. So that's your lifeline. If you get disoriented or you get nervous or something goes wrong, you got to make sure. And the RTH button can be a little squirrely. On mine, you touch it and then you hold it down, or actually I forget, maybe you just hold it down for 3 seconds, but you gotta make sure you know how to use that so you don't get flustered and you can get the drone back. A few flying tips. Again, the drone will mostly fly itself, but again, don't do stupid things with it. Consider wind conditions. So, again, outdoor photographers, we're always worrying about, the direction of the light and is it going to be good light and all those things. Now with the drone, we have to be worried about wind conditions. And if you see on your weather app anything in the high teens, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to have a good experience with your drone. I can't speak for the Mini, but the Air 2S, and I'm sure the, sorry, I already forgot, the next one up, they have a high wind warning. And you will only be able to override that to a certain degree, but if it detects that the wind is too strong, it'll say, forget it, and fly itself back to where it took off from automatically. So wind is another thing you have to consider when you're planning someplace to go photograph. You have again, over the high teens, and you probably either can't or don't want to fly your drone.
Hey, Pete,
Yeah.
I know in the Mini 2, it's got, at least it has a warning. I don't know whether it will fly back automatically if it's wind's too high. I haven't
Okay.
encountered that yet. But
Yeah, well,
I have gotten wind warnings.
yeah, if you've gotten them, I think if you ignore it, or trying to think when I've had this problem, or if the wind gets too high, it'll just say I'm coming back.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll give you a few war stories. So I took this thing with me to Iceland in September, and you guys remember all the volcano that erupted there last year. On my last day there, I was on a guided tour for a few days, and we had to go where they went, but I had 3 days where I was just renting a car and driving around. And the last day there was very good weather near Reykjavik. So I decided I wanted to see the volcano, and unfortunately it was not erupting that day. So wasn't too committed for this, but it was still a spectacular sight. You could see this vast lava field, and on the crater, there was all sorts of evidence of fresh eruptions, and, smoking and steaming. And I'm there thinking, just even though it's not moving lava, it would still be a cool close-in shot. And I'm thinking about, should I fly it over there? And unfortunately, if you can imagine a straight line between volcano and then me, the wind was blowing, I want to say this right, it was blowing from me to the volcano. It was under the high wind limit, but it was still pretty strong. And I just weaned out because I was just afraid that I would get it up there, the wind would get stronger, and it might get, and plus higher up, the wind's going to be more noticeable, that I wouldn't be able to fly it back to me because the wind would overpower the motors in the drone. So wind is an important consideration. You saw all of the parameters related to the camera on my phone. So you are going to need to make adjustments on your camera while you're flying. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're just kind of panicked because you can't make the touch screen work, or you get in there and you don't know the menus. So you need to take this thing off, and a couple of times practice going into the camera menus and changing stuff. So, because otherwise, you might have a really good shot in front of you, and you need to change some of those parameters, and you can't do it. So you need to practice making adjustments to the camera in a practice mode, not while you're trying to shoot stuff.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Back to the wind.
Yes.
The drones have a maximum flying speed in any direction. They have a maximum flying speed. If the drone is out there and you're back here and the wind is blowing away from you and toward the drone, if the wind is exceeding the drone's maximum flying speed, you could be in a flyaway situation where the drone won't come back. And
yeah, that's exactly what I was afraid of in Iceland.
Those are the numbers. Yeah, those are the numbers. And like you said, oftentimes the wind is higher, is greater up higher. So if you do get into a situation like that where the drone won't come back, I would come closer to the ground and see if you could get back that way.
Yeah, I would agree. I've actually done that once where I was getting the high wind warning, and I just dropped it 100 or 200 feet and got it closer to the ground, and it was better down there. But anyway, as you can tell, as everyone can tell from those of us who've flown these things, wind is definitely a consideration in flying your drones. So unless you know you're taking off from pavement, bring a big towel and anchor it with, rocks on the edges. Because otherwise, when you take off and land, dust will get sucked into your motors. The motors are open, so they're not sealed, and you don't want dust all over your drone. In particular, you don't want particles in those motors. So you have to have a towel to land these, take them off and land from. Okay, so this is just a peat thing, and I'm not really sure if this is exactly true, but I have only had one near-death experience. And and I'll describe what that was and why I put this bullet in here. In your flight control menus, you can set parameters that say never fly the drone higher than X and never fly it further away than Y. I had them set relatively close in just because it seemed like a good idea. And I was actually flying locally here. And it turned out I needed to get to a little different spot when I was using it to take the photo I wanted to take. And I hit the maximum distance and the drone stopped responding to commands because I think it was something in the software that just confused it. So, I was sitting there, it wouldn't respond, and I could see the battery draining down, and I forget exactly what I did, but somehow I know what I did. I went back into the menus, and I didn't understand what was happening, but I said, maybe that's it. And I went back into the menus and increased the distance parameter, and then it started responding again. So I don't really know if this is fact or fiction, but I had this experience. So I set my parameters to their maximums, even though, you would never do that. So just a heads up on at least the Air 2S, that's how I would set it up. So more drone photo tips. Focusing, remember I said I have that little sign up there. So the focusing on these things works like your cell phone, which basically it's trying to, the autofocus is always continuously trying to keep everything in focus. And I'd say almost all the time it works pretty well, but if you happen to be relatively close to something or just as a good precaution, when I've identified the subject, I tap on the screen to make sure that it's focused correctly. And that is how you do this. You just tap kind of like with your phone, and that will focus it on the correct spot. So remember to do that. And if you forget, like I was doing, I put a little note up there. I always bracket my shots because you just don't want to you do want to worry about your exposures, but not that much. So with a 5-shot bracket, DJI is kind of an annoying thing about DJI. It's not user definable. You can set 5 or 3, I think, but only 7/10 of a stop apart. So, and you can't make the 7/10 larger or smaller. But with a 5-shot bracket, 7/10 of a stop apart, you're getting a range of 3 stops, and most of the time that takes care of everything. And when I get back, I either just HDR them, or I at least know that there's going to be most likely one exposure where I have a usable histogram exposure. So I would always bracket, even if you don't think you're going to use all the exposures. Again, be able to adjust the parameters in the air, understand all your menus. Try and stay. Now, this is again, this would be even more true on the minis, but even on the Air 2S, which has a much larger sensor, try and keep your ISO at 200. And I have definitely noticed that compared to my DSLR, these photos just have more noise and they don't clean up as well in noise reduction software. So help it and try and keep your ISO as low as feasible. So that would be my advice, is leave it at 200. And if for some reason you have to go higher, then make that adjustment, but try and do it at 200. I haven't done this, but the drones don't shoot vertical images very well. So, but using your the gimbal on the camera, you can adjust your tilt, and you can shoot a succession of vertical images and then assemble them in Lightroom. So I would encourage people to try Pinnacles, and I have heard from watching videos and YouTube videos on this that it works just fine. There's somebody in my drone study group for PSA who shoots a lot of panos, and it seems to work just great for her. So try panos every now and then. And then more tips. So, when I have done webinars on landscape astrophotography, I always have this in there that, just because you're shooting a cool Milky Way at nighttime, or just because you're flying a drone and getting a very unusual look at something, effective composition and lighting still matter. So, you need to, at the risk of getting into composition cliches, your images are going to work much better if there's a distinctive subject on the left or the right side of the image. They're going to work much better if there's elements that can balance out the main subject, and whatever else is relevant. They're going to look much better if you're in good light. And there's a guy in my drone study group who says, quote, "I don't like to fly in low light," and he's a very nice man, but I just cringe at some of his photos because the lighting isn't any good. So composition and lighting still matter. So you need to be cognizant of composition when you're flying and shooting and maneuvering your drone. And lighting is, you want to fly your drones when you're going to have effective light on subjects. So composition and lighting still matter even with drones. This is just some personal experience. I have tended to have some regrets when I come back and look at these things on Lightroom that I wasn't close enough. So 22 millimeters is a huge field of view, and you probably, however well you think you're composed, you probably want to be closer to your subject than you think. So that would be something I would just encourage people to think about when they're using these for photography. It can be very hard to get stuff out of your drone images. From experience, I can tell you, I think, this will be a great shot, and there'll be a road or a car or something in it. When you're up there in the air, you see everything, things you don't realize are there when you're on the ground. So this is just to tell you to sort of expect this. There's nothing you can do about it, except maybe be closer so you don't get as much stuff in the picture. But you will find that frequently your pictures have more things in them than you would see as ideal. So another thing to be aware of. And questions so far?
Yes, Gary again.
Yeah.
My son had the Maverick Pro that he got 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and then had a ultimate failure and it crashed, and so it's not usable anymore.
Yeah.
He ended up getting some filters to put on his camera. I think mainly neutral density filters.
Yeah.
Have you gotten those at all?
Well, on the Air, I don't know about the Mini, but on the Air 2S, when you get the combo kit, it comes with filters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so I don't know if they'll fit on your camera on that thing. You're welcome to borrow them if you didn't get them, but they're definitely in the combo. I think you get I forget, it's a 4-stop, 8-stop, 16, and a 24 or something. So you can really make it dark up there. I would confess that when I was in Iceland, I shot some waterfalls, and I thought about using them, but I never really had ideal times to use the drone in Iceland because there were so many other things to shoot. I didn't want to take the time. And when I was on the tour, we were typically not at places for hours and hours, and I would be worried I was slowing down the group. So I didn't really have time to experiment with it. But you could use the ND filters for trying to slow down water. I have heard, when I'm watching YouTube videos about this, that if it's not too windy, it works okay. It'll be, you'll have a stable drone up there for a 1-second exposure if you popped a 16-stop filter on the camera. They're magnetic, so they slip on there very easily. So someday I'll try that. I do have them, and I mean, they should work. I think, again, I don't do video with these things, but I think there are circumstances where the videographers might use them more than the photographers.
I think that's what my son was using it mostly for.
Yeah, and again, I don't know why that is, but I'm really ignorant about video.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
all right, I'm going to move on. So where have I shot? I shot at the Trona Pinnacles. That's a BLM site. That is drone legal. I even checked with the BLM office because I was wondering about something there, but you can shoot at the Trona Pinnacles. At least, again, you could shoot at the Trona Pinnacles 6 months ago. I have to qualify all these. Again, nothing's changed. Rainbow Basin in Barstow, it's about 10 miles north of the city of Barstow, is again BLM land, and it is fabulous for outdoor shooting. Some parts, and I have to emphasize some parts of Lake Tahoe are drone legal. So if you like your water shore shots, Lake Tahoe is a good place to try this. They're mostly on the east side of the lake, but I was at a family vacation up there, and one night I looked up what beaches you could shoot on, and went up there and shot some evening shots once of the seashore. So parts of Lake Tahoe. The Alabama Hills near Lone Pine, again, you're on BLM land. That's good to go, although there is an airport in Lone Pine and you got to be 5 miles away from it. So if you're kind of up into the Alabama, some parts of it show up as not allowed. But as you go further away from Lone Pine toward the Sierras, there are spots that are okay. Valley of the Gods, it's not around the corner, but super fabulous place. Hardly anybody's there. There's no restrictions on drones, and scenery is just off the charts. Iceland is drone paradise. Iceland is, you can fly a drone anywhere unless it says you can't. And there's not, the big tourist sites say no drones, but otherwise they're fair game. In fact, I have seen photo workshops that are basically drone workshops for Iceland because they're so useful there. Some parts of the Mojave Desert, the Mojave National Scenic Preserve is a park, so you can't shoot inside that, but there are areas that are national monument or just BLM uncontrolled. So some parts of the Mojave Desert are okay. The Los Padres National Forest is fair game as long as you're not in a wilderness area. And there are a number of wilderness areas inside Los Padres. And that would be true for the Angeles National Forest too. So you can shoot there, or fly there, but you have to watch out for the wilderness areas. And I'm going to show you a picture in a minute that is kind of a workaround to, it's an example of a workaround to all these restrictions about drones. And so east of Badlands National Park, there's some very interesting sites for using your drones. Okay, so I'm just going to do pictures from here out, and any other questions, or again, you can interrupt me when we're doing pictures, but if not, I'm just going to keep moving. I've got about 10 images that I've shot in the year I've owned this thing. They're sort of in order, but not especially, actually. So this is local. This is Ladyface Mountain, and kind of at the Ladyface end of it. And it was last June or July, I think, and I kind of held out till there were some nice clouds, and then shot this near sunset. So I didn't mention this, but drones are great for people pictures. So this is Monument Valley, and that's club member Suzanne Tanaka and myself. And we were on our way for our trip out to the wave in February. We spent an evening and a morning there. The evening was fabulous, and the morning we had, you can see it's just massive overcast, and the lighting was a little flat there. But anyway, I took off the drone and had the two of us pose for drone photos. But yeah, I've seen great, really exciting photos of people in crazy spots that are compelling landscape, but also human interest pictures. This is also in the Valley of the Gods. Again, that was our morning, so it looked like the light was picking up a little bit here, but we had that big overcast sky. And this was the evening before. This is another angle of Settingham Butte that I showed you at the beginning. This is kind of looking up the spine of the thing. And I would be the last person to say this is some kind of brilliant picture. But, I would point out that when I said composition is important, here I've taken the spine and used that as a leading line and put the sort of main subject up there in the left third of the image. So it's things like this is what you kind of want to be looking for, if you can find them, where you're putting interesting elements inside your composition. So this is a fun one. So this is, has anyone ever been to Mexican Hat? Mexican Hat is near Valley of the Gods in southeast Utah. So it's just this funny flat rock that's perched up on that sort of post. And it does look like from the ground, it looks just like a big Mexican hat. And I was, flirting with the idea of trying to land on it, but I knew that would be a terrible idea deep within my heart, so I didn't do it. But just as an example of where you can get a different perspective of this thing, this is an example of, I sort of made a mistake in this picture because you can see the shadow over to the left, and I just never noticed this in my phone. And had I noticed it, I would have composed where I was not quite so close to the left edge of the picture, and maybe made the shadow a little bit more prominent. But anyway, this is a fun shot in Mexican Hat, Utah. So this is Lake Tahoe on the, again, on the east side, in an area that you are allowed to fly drones. And this is straight down. I'm at, I don't know whether you call that 90 degrees or 0 degrees, but I'm shooting straight down on these, so you can see both the lake shore and then some of the pretty rocks. The water, as you know, is relatively clear there. Then this is my background picture. This is the Amboy Crater. And I took the drone with me. It's about a mile or mile and a half walk from the parking area. And I took the drone with me and climbed up the trail right here and stood on the crater rim and launched the drone and then aimed it back at myself and took this again, as where we had good light near sunset. There's a lot of stuff over here. There's a railroad track, and the city of Amboy that is home for 37 people is over here. So I didn't want that in there, so I took that out with Photoshop. But this is the Amboy Crater. I think I put a couple of Rainbow Basin pictures in here. So absolutely fabulous place to shoot drone pictures, because a lot of this really cool stuff, these colors in here, you can't really see it from the ground. From the ground, this looks like pretty good spot, but from the air, it's just tremendous. And then that night, my wife and I were there, and we had a very nice sunset. So Rainbow Basin is, for the hikers in the group, it's a great place to go hiking, and nice place for land photos, and an off the charts place for drone photos. So one of my goals for the winter was to get some pictures of winter, snow from the drone. And we got all this rain and snow in December, and I said, oh, I'll just get around to it because we're going to have snow all winter long. Well, that was obviously kind of a mistake, because then we went 2 months and it didn't snow. So we did have one final blast of weather in early March, and they got about, this is the top of Mount Pinos, and the parking lot is maybe a quarter of a mile. Or no, it's just, I think the parking lot is just out of the picture. And so it snowed, and I said, well, tomorrow morning is the day, and I drove up there, and fortunately the road, it was nicely plowed in the afternoon or evening, and I still had a little bit of snow on the trees and used the squiggly road as kind of a compositional element. I wish I had gotten there. As it was, I left the house at, I don't know, 4:45 in the morning or 5. I wish I'd gotten there earlier anyway, and maybe not had all this light punching through over on the upper right, and maybe a more even exposure. But anyway, this is my one contribution to winter drone photography. That's all fresh snow. It all came down in the previous 36 hours. This is the Throne of Pinnacles. And again, really nice spot for drone photography. This is the Poppies. Maybe you'll forgive me. If you don't like this, you can forgive me, but this is like a poppy abstract. So it's outside the preserve. The preserve is not legal to fly your drone in, but there's plenty of areas outside of the preserve. And I just picked one and took off and shot some normal shots, but then I tried a poppy abstract. So this is kind of an example of some of the interesting things you can do with a drone that aren't available as with DLSR ground cameras. Same thing here. This is the Alabama Hills that I converted to black and white, aimed straight down and sort of a, rock abstract, if you want to call it that. And this is that same morning, a little bit later in the Alabama Hills. That's Lone Pine Peak. And, still, I'm a little after peak light here, but, it's a nice shot of the eastern Sierras while there's still reasonable light on things. And the Alabama Hills were still glowing, and they're very colorful when you have a relatively low light. There were a few, I don't know, there was a house or something over here. This is a good example of where there's just things that wind up in these photos that you wouldn't expect, because I had no idea the house was there from where I took off. And this is an example of a workaround for where drones are not legal in national parks. So this is about 10 miles east of Badlands National Park. I was there last summer in July. And it has basically the same geology and look and feel as the park itself, but it's not in the park. So it's fair game for flying your drone. And I went out there one morning and shot this. It was after peak light. I was only there for either 3 or 4 days, so I had a limited number of mornings and evenings, and I decided not to use it on a drone photo. So I'm here probably maybe an hour, 90 minutes, and maybe an hour after sunrise. The sun looks still pretty low. But if I ever go back there again, I would definitely be out here right at the crack of dawn and see what would happen. So, but again, you can find places near parks or wilderness areas that have the same appearances and geology, but are where the drones are allowed to be flown. And this is this is near, this is a little past the town of Mojave off of Route 14. It's a colorful canyon that, again, is not, you don't really see much of this from the road, but I had looked at it on Google Earth, and it did seem like there would be some color deeper into the canyon. So I went out there in the morning and happened to get a nice sky and pretty good sunrise. And this is let's call it Unknown Canyon near Red Rock State Park.
Hey, question about that one.
Yeah.
And several others. You show portrait pictures like this. Are you using a vertical panel, or are you just cropping the heck out of the side?
I haven't done a vertical panel, and I need to start doing that.
Okay,
So no, this is just
cropped.
a big crop.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of
like all of us nowadays, for competition and stuff, this is all online. So even this picture, if I were entering this in a composition at say the club specs like 1400 to 1280, I'd still be cutting the file size probably like 75%. So the fact that I've lost a lot of the image, as long as I'm not going to print it, it's not really a problem. But I definitely do need to do vertical panels, so no question about it.
Practice, practice, practice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's always stuff to do. So this is that. So now we have some Iceland photos. This is I'm kind of low here. I'm probably not even 100 feet up. This is kind of, I'm trying to think. The water has, this is silting. It's black sand, and it's probably the volcanic field here is maybe, I think this is from Katla, so it's maybe 250 years old, and it's turned into sand, and kind of the water it's silted up, so the seashore, the ocean shore is much further away now, and just kind of a nice, cool, every direction you look in, you just see this flat black area. And we got one of the people in the party who had a nice red jacket to go out there, and people shot ground shots of her, and I took the drone up for a few minutes and shot her. This is also in Iceland. This is again, it's ancient lava flow that also from the same volcano. It's not too far from the black sand area, except it's all mossed over. And the moss here is about 18 inches deep and just goes on forever. And I just thought this was a nice image of, again, that you could never take. You never understand this from the ground. And this just turned out, to my eye anyway, kind of a nice image of moss-covered lava. It's really weird walking on this stuff. It's like walking on a giant sponge with incredibly uneven terrain underneath you. So it would be slow going to get anywhere. And then this is my one waterfall picture from Iceland. And I should know the name of this, and I forgot, but it's another example where you could not take this, there just wasn't any angle on the ground where you could get in front of the waterfall and kind of get a straight in shot like this. So it looked like people were going to stay there a little bit longer than normal. So I broke out the drone and took it off and flew it over the outflow and aimed it back into the waterfall. And yeah, again, if I wanted to fool around with it, this would have been a good example to maybe have tried that 16 stop ND and see if I could have blur the water without losing detail because of motion into the terrain. But anyway, it's my one Iceland waterfall. And I think that's all I had. So I don't know, questions or comments? And those of you who don't own drones, are you going to go out and buy one? Or?